Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Sal and the Stanislaus Audubon for having me. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. As you said, my name is Joanna Wu, and I'm currently getting my PhD at UCLA over here. I've spent some summers working in the Sierra Nevada, and I'm a big fan of just around the Yosemite area and Stanislaus. So I'm pleased to be here speaking with some of you all. And I love the birds up in that area. I'll talk about some of them tonight. So before I get started, I want to thank Sal and Henry for bringing me here, and also acknowledge my collaborators at the Galbatross Project, a lot of whom have taught me the information that I'm sharing some of today. I want to acknowledge the Female Birdsong Project, Ken Kaufman, and many others who pioneered the space in uplifting work about female birds. A brief outline of what I'm going to talk about today is why should we focus specifically on female birds? Why not, we need to mind both sexes, right? Um, I'm also going to talk about Female Bird Day and the Galbatross Project and give you some identification tips, visual vocalizations, and behavior. Now, I know a lot of you will be better birders than I am, but I'm hoping that even the best birders here will leave tonight learning one new fact about female birds that maybe you didn't know before. However, it's hard, and of course, you can't identify the female of all species at all times. And lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about female song and what I think is next and exciting questions left to be unanswered about female birds. Okay, why females to begin with? We talked a little bit about, we gotta study both sexes. And I Googled the word bird, and these are some of the first photos that showed up. The stunning male Baltimore Oriole in breeding plumage, a bright blue jay, very beautiful photo, and a breeding red male scarlet tanager. And of course, humans being visual creatures, we're naturally drawn to bright colors and birds that uh, are visually attractive like this. Another thing that you all will notice is that these are all Eastern birds, and us in the West Coast, we always we don't have as much of a birding presence online, so that always gets me thinking a little bit. Hey, why don't you showcase our black-headed grosbeak and things like that when it's always the cardinal and the blue jay? Okay, I have a first quiz for you guys. There's few enough people, you can feel free to be interactive in the chat. So, does anyone know the species of this bird? I'll give you a hint. It's a female, and she's a lot different from what the male looks like. Anyone want to venture a guess? Or what type of bird this is? Maybe like a
Looks like
um,
a
I,
tanager.
I think it's a female scarlet tanager.
great. You guys nailed it. I'm not sure who spoke, but yeah, it's exactly it. It's a female scarlet tanager, and she looks so different from the male. And well done there. Like for me, I haven't spent enough time studying the. I think it would confuse me if I saw a summer tanager versus a scarlet in the field that's female. So as you can see, she looks just so different from the bright red male counterpart. So I'm going to introduce some words that some of you may be familiar with. We have the word dimorphic, is when two sexes look different. They have two morphs. Of course, my favorite bird is the California quail, actually, and this is a visually dimorphic species where the male has a funny little plume that's longer and more vibrant colors in his throat and breast than the female. We have this bird called the Eclectus parrot, where the female is the red one and the male is green, and she defends multiple males on her territory while the male goes around and forages for food. And the sexes look so different that in the beginning, when zoos were trying to keep them, they were keeping the red birds with the red birds and the green birds with the green birds, and wondering why this these two species weren't breeding among themselves, but it turned out that this is actually a dimorphic species that just the sexes look really different. And then we've got species that are monomorphic, like this black crowned night heron. The sexes look the same, different from juveniles, but males and females look the same. And I mentioned that males are often brighter, and that's the case more for North American and European species. But on the bottom row, we've got three birds from the tropics, and in the tropics, male and females both tend to be bright, more on average, more than in the near Arctic areas. And that's often because tropical birds hold year-round territories and they breed, maybe twice a year, and the sexes both have territorial behavior. So there's less dimorphism in the tropics, and females are just as vibrant in a lot of the case. And then, of course, we have the case where the female is brighter than the male. Has anyone gotten the chance to see a red phalarope or a red-necked phalarope in their breeding habitats? That's one of my goals. Anyway, these females look so stunning, and of course, they also have a polyandrous mating system where females hold multiple territorial males. Awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to get up there sometime and see them in their breeding glory. Um, but again, as humans, whoever is the brighter sex, we're just not naturally attracted to. It's not malicious, it's not intentional. And we've got, cases like in photography, you always see the male hummingbird, whether it's Anna's or Allen's or ruby-throated or whatnot. And then in artwork, they rarely ever show a female cardinal during Christmas time. It's always the male because again, humans are visual creatures like birds. This is a bias, and it's pervades into naming as well. We've got this bird here on the left called the blue grosbeak, and there's hardly anything blue about her besides a little patch on the wing that's hard to see sometimes. And then we've got the red-winged blackbird, clearly named after both the red-winged part and the blackbird part are, they conjure up the characteristics of the male, whereas the female is this streaky sparrow-looking bird that confuses a lot of beginning birders into thinking it's a sparrow. But I'm going to read this little funny excerpt from early ornithologist Florence Marion Bailey, who said, "Like other ladies, the little feathered brides have to bear their husbands' names, however inappropriate. What injustice! Here an innocent creature with an olive green back and yellowish breast has to go about all her days known as the black-throated blue warbler, just because that happens to describe the dress of her spouse." Yeah, just a funny characterization, but it's true. Naming is definitely male biased in common bird names. This bias is prevalent in bird watching too. In fact, if people want to scan this QR code, it'll take you to an article written by somebody who's inspired me and the Galbatross Project, Ken Kaufman, who writes really beautifully, "I became a better birder when I stopped focusing on males." And Ken writes that he has a friend who would not count any bird unless they saw the adult male of that species. But why would you do that? That's ignoring at least half of the population if you're only focusing on seeing the adult male. So right, and he argues very eloquently that you would be able to you need to focus on subtle traits like the shape of the bill, the size of the bird, how the eye-ring looks, when you're focusing on the females, and not just, oh, okay, the color indicates it's a male. So I think this is a brilliant idea that it challenges you to become a better birder. For me, the most important thing about studying female birds is that there can be conservation gaps. I've talked a lot about the biases, that unconscious biases we have toward the brighter and more attractive males. While males are often easier to study in science as well, easier to capture, or easier to determine the sex of. And we generally have more data on male birds than on female birds. And sometimes that's okay. If males and females do the exact same thing, that's maybe okay. But in this case, female golden winged warblers use more secondary habitats than male golden winged warblers in the non-breeding season, where they spend most of their life. And this study by Dr. Bennett has found that the secondary habitats that the female golden wings use are being lost at a rate that's twice as high as the male biased primary forest, just because the secondary habitats are closer to human habitations and are easier to reach by logging. What does this mean for the birds is a really big question, and I think it's really important to study where else do we have this knowledge gap about females. Are all the proper places conserved for both sexes? Besides the golden wing warbler, there's not too much known on how sexes use habitats separately. Another example that we have studies on is the black and white warbler, that there's some height stratification happening, that males tend to use the canopy areas. This is proportion of males is higher, and in the understory and mid canopy, there's a higher proportion of females. And this is thought to result from dominance, where females are excluded to these lower canopy height structure areas. Another way, jumping away from the warbler world, is that albatrosses also have different space use that's based on sex. So the males have lighter wing loading and they fly farther south in the southern hemisphere than the females. And because females interact more with longline fishing, one study found that female albatrosses are subject to mortality from fishing fleets more than males are. But that one study is not universal everywhere. And in the second study here, the behavior responses one, they didn't find any differences of encounters with fishing boats by sex. So more work is to be done for sure. In another extreme example, the red-tailed shearwater is a species where the females incubate in their burrows. And one study found that in an extreme case of flooding that's related to climate change, the females that were incubating experienced direct mortality. And, this is something that affects the sexes differently if only one sex incubates, for example. One aspect of male and female biology that has been studied relatively more is the timing of migration. We understand that from neotropical migrants, males arrive in the spring usually a little bit earlier than females. They fly faster. Some of them overwinter farther north, and they set up their territories. And then females come a little bit later, typically. With climate change and leaves getting greener earlier and insects emerging earlier, we expect that the migration will also advance. So that's going left on the x-axis is earlier in the year. But one study found that males are advancing their breeding arrival dates faster than females. So males are indeed coming earlier, but females are sort of staying at the same peak as they were at before. And what does this mean? There's a mismatch in when the males and females are arriving. Does this have any consequences for breeding, or are they adapting to this okay? These are all important questions to study. Speaking of study, I mentioned a little bit there's scientific bias in how we study males and females. And part of the reason is that males are just visually more attractive, but another thing exists is that we tend to have more males in museum collections, and our biases, our survey methods for collecting data about about song, about visual detection, they tend to be male biased. They were created to identify male birds. eBird is a powerful tool that I'm sure many of you like to use, and it's fantastic for documenting what birds are around. But they've got this sorry about my dog. They've got this detailed breeding code selection. Excuse me. There's someone else out there, so he's barking at the other dog. In eBird, you can say detailed things like there's a singing male present for 7 days. A woodpecker or a wren is building a nest. But despite that, there's currently no tool that I know of on the mobile app to select the basic information of sex. So despite being so powerful and such a giant database that we ornithologists use all the time and rely on it, there's not much sex data from eBird, which is, to me, it's a big shame because I would love to analyze, like, do males and females, are they present in the same places at equal abundances? But these questions can't easily be asked with eBird data currently. Okay. So that brings me to the Galbatross Project and Female Bird Day. Who's the Galbatross Project? I'm part of a group of 5 conservationists, birders, and scientists who connected through the National Audubon Society. We call ourselves the Galbatross Project, consisting of Brooke Bateman, Stephanie Bilkey, Martha Harbison, Purbita Saha, and myself. We were established in 2019, and these 3 birders, Martha, Purbita, and Stephanie, went out to participate in New Jersey's World Series of Birding. And despite that these 3 are some of the best bird watchers I know, they only counted a bird if they were certain it's a female. And they got very few species. They came out third to last in the list, beating out 2 groups of toddlers and children, I believe. And very excitingly, this past year in 2025, they were able to go back to the World Series of Birding and basically do this over again, just counting female birds, and they did slightly better. They got a few more species than they did last time, but still coming out at just 38 species after a long day of birding during the peak of migration. So it's really challenging to identify female birds, and some of the ones they got include Mississippi kite, prothonotary warbler, chipping sparrow, and so forth. So kudos to them for doing this and just like documenting the process and spreading word about female birds along the way. I'm excited to share too that another way we promote awareness about female birds is the 5 of us published a paper recently in IBIS. It's a perspective piece called "A Focus on Females Can Improve Science and Conservation." And if you want to read the study, feel free to scan the QR code. But yeah, we talked about a lot of the sex biases that I'm covering today, and how ways that we can focus on females more to cover some of these knowledge gaps. For example, it would be fine to assume to, not worry about studying females if everything was equal biologically. But we know that sex governs many aspects of biology, like survival rates, reproductive roles, habitat use, dispersal tendencies, vocalizations, and climate impacts can impact sexes differently. And then there's all these other fields that we didn't even weren't able to address, but sex is a fundamental biological trait, and it's one that scientists do not consider enough, in my opinion. So in our paper, we suggest that basically in data collection, we should broaden the collection of female data and traits. And then in terms of the people who and where are doing this study, we should budget for sex-specific questions and broaden the regions of study. And this is a good opportunity to encourage community contribution and involve the community as well in this work. Very excitingly, National Geographic covered this paper and wrote a nice article about it. And they called it Bird Science Has a Bro Bias, which is really funny. So I'm going to go now into some identification tips, and bear with me if you already know some of these. So going back to the word dimorphic, some birds are visually dimorphic, like the male northern flicker has a black mustachio patch that the female doesn't have. So that's one key way of identifying that species by sex. They can be visibly dimorphic in a very obvious way, like house finches are red when they're male, but then when they're female or immature in the summer and fall, which can be tricky, then they look like this. Of course, the classic belted kingfisher, which I'm using as a sort of a banner poster bird because the belt is named after the rust-colored belt of the female. So this is one of the very few birds that the trait is named after that the bird is named after a female trait. This is so subtle, but there's some sexual dimorphism in the bill coloration of European starlings. I don't always have good success with this one, but in some cases you can tell that the female has pink at the base of the bill, and males are identified by having more gray at the base of their bill. Relative size is a good way to tell raptors apart. Of course, female raptors tend to be bigger than males. In this photo, the American kestrel female is in the background, but she still appears bigger than the male in the foreground here. I have another quiz for y'all. What's the species of the bird on the left, this raptor here? And while people think about that, I'll mention that again, the female is larger, and in this case, it's an immature female that's molting into her adult plumage. And we've got a male, her partner was caught too, which is already an older male. And they're different in eye colors too. I think they get, I believe that both sexes sort of have lemon yellow eyes as juveniles, and then they get brown as they get older. Any guesses on the species on the left?
Cooper's hawk?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, great. It took me a while to learn the difference between Cooper's and Sharpshin, but yeah, I guess with this rounded tail, it's more diagnostic of a Cooper's hawk. And their heads look bigger, some like just honkier. Great. Of course, here we've got a pair of great gray owls. When I've seen them, the sexes aren't this dimorphic, so this is kind of an extreme example. I'm also going to play a clip to listen for the hoots. This is a pair duetting. Okay, so actually the female starts and she has a higher pitched hoot, and the male, despite being smaller, has a lower pitched hoot and he joins in later. So this is one of my favorite things. Sometimes I can be in my room laying in bed and I can tell what sex of the owl is that's calling outside my door. It's such a fun treat to be able to hear the two types of hoot calls of the great horns. Okay, I'm putting this example in because y'all are in California, and I also love this example of vocal dimorphism. For rent, it's the song of the female just kind of like accelerates, just kind of peters it down, but the male has an accelerating trail that really sounds like a ping pong ball. It gets faster and faster. Let's listen to the male. So it descends into a trill at the end. And then for the female, it gets faster, but it kind of ends as pit, 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 pit instead of a trill. Yeah. I love this example of the male and female rented, but try to listen for that next time you're in their habitat. Okay, how do I scroll? Okay, here we go. In examples, a lot of birds, a lot of songbirds, both sexes take care of, especially feeding the chicks, but incubation is sometimes done exclusively by the females in species like chestnut-back chickadee and all Empidonax flycatchers. Whether you can identify the species or not is another challenge, but if you see one of these incubating, it's a female only. Uh, this photo is kind of crazy. Not all these chicks belong to this female merganser, but um, in some cases, like the ducks, only females care for the young. However, it's really, really hard. Um, I've read that in mourning doves, the male has a brighter blue lower and flesh color around the eyes and nose, but it's really subtle to me. So sometimes it's just not possible. This is another subtle one, but which one is the female acorn woodpecker? The one on the left or right? People can put it in the chat or say it. Yeah, great job. Yeah, it's the one on the right. And I didn't know this for years. I was just focusing on how much they look like clowns and loving them for that. But the red of the male is more extensive and the crown touches the white feathers, whereas in females, the red and the white are always separated by the black band. So next time you see a flock of acorns, try to pick out which are the males and females. We've got subtle birds like the spotted towhee, where the female is just a little bit more washed out and not as vibrant as the male. We've got really subtle ones like the cedar waxwing, where the male has a darker colored throat that's got more black, whereas the female has like more brownish and very little less black on the throat. This is a wacky trait where female black oyster catchers and American oyster catchers tend to have a bit of a pigmentation coming out from the pupil of their eyeballs, and the male tends to have a clear, like a clean pupil that's black. We don't really know why this is. They think it's to identify sexes, to signal the sex to other oyster catchers, but this is just such a cool and subtle trait to look for. In the American avocet, here is a female and male pair. The female is in the back and she's got a shorter and more recurved bill, whereas the male has a longer, straighter bill. Again, not always able to tell these, especially if they're not standing next to each other like these are. And scientists think that this is to help with allowing the sexes to use slightly different resources when they're foraging in mudflats and intertidal zones. We've got birds like the American coot, where you can't actually tell the sexes apart visually. So sometimes that's the case as well. I want to quickly talk about the Female Birdsong Project, which has been one of the inspirations for me and the Galbatross Project. They found that the common ancestors of songbirds likely had female song, So of all these clades, the ones in red are clades that had female song present, and the ones in blue do not have female song. So more of them do than did not have female song. And it turns out that female song is probably lost over time rather than something that has evolved repeatedly in some species. And moreover, at least 150 North American species have female songs. Of the ones that we know have sex-specific song information, female song is present in 64 or two-thirds of them. When I learned about birds, I learned that the song is something that birds have to cognitively learn, and it's produced by males during the breeding season. This is exciting because the definition of song is changing in the very textbooks of ornithology with the work of these researchers and others that have found that both sexes do learn song, and females and males use it in a territorial way and to communicate, and that it's not a male only trait. Again, some of this information comes from our biases that we work in North America and Europe, where more males have songs than females. That's true. But again, in the tropics, it's really prevalent for both sexes to be singing to each other and to have learned song. Next, I want to talk about something fun that the Galbatrosses have been able to participate in. I mentioned earlier that photography tends to be male biased too. I was looking for photos that I can use in my slides, and I talked to Audubon's photography director, and I said, I really can't find any in our database of female birds. And she said, you're right, like we just don't have as many submissions. And so the following year, she started something called the Female Bird Prize in the Audubon Photography Awards. And this encourages photographers to go out and look for female birds and send in beautiful photos of female birds. So our very first year, we awarded the Female Bird Prize. Oh, and they invited the Galbatrosses to be judges, which is just one of my very favorite things to do, to look through stunning images and to understand like what makes each one female in particular. Of course, the male Northern Harrier is gray in color, and we thought that the light shining on this one is just beautiful. And this photographer is based in the Bay Area as well, so that's also a fun connection. In 2022, we awarded the Female Bird Prize to the greater sage grouse. We know and love the male sage grouses with their pouches and their legs, but of course the female is gorgeous and fun in their own way. In 2023, we awarded it to this photo of a female Baltimore oriole. She's building a nest, carrying more nesting material than her, bigger than her body size. I believe that the photographer said that these are hairs picked from the neighbor's horses, or like found in the horse shed or whatever, which is really just, I don't know, this looks so magical with the hairs framing her body. Last year, we awarded it to a wild turkey walking on train tracks. Love the urban wildlife interface here. And we're gonna just getting ready to announce this year's winner as well, so stay tuned for that. So just a few concluding remarks. Females are not just like males. There are a lot of true biological differences. And don't assume that, there's a lot of things to not assume. Don't assume that just because you see a male, that means that there's a partner nearby. Sometimes males sing louder or more when they're unpaired. And we also shouldn't assume that females are too hard to identify or too cryptic or that only males sing. So I hope that these slides have challenged at least one or two of your assumptions, which are just passed down and traditional in the birding world. And I encourage you to bird the challenge, to go out and look for females next time you're out bird watching and see, just really challenge yourself to increase your birding levels as well. Some of the questions I'm interested in studying include, do male birds live longer than female birds? In mammals, it's the case that females live longer than males. But in birds, there's evidence that male birds live longer than females. Maybe it's related to their chromosomes, how males have the ZZ chromosome, two copies of Z's, and females have ZW. So there might be some more mutations that occur when you only have one copy of the Z chromosome. So I'm doing a study on survivorship in a PhD. And I also want to understand whether more species than the golden wing warbler use habitat differently, and that's segregated by sex. So I'm looking at some non-breeding banding data and trying to relate them to habitat variables and see just what else can we find out about how these birds use habitats. And another big question that I won't be able to tackle in my PhD, but I'm hoping to answer in the future is, with the threat of climate change, how is it going to impact the sexes differently? We shouldn't just think about the species level, but we should look beyond that in order to better understand their impacts that we're having on the birds and to better protect both sexes so that they can have adequate protection and population persistence into the future. However, some of this work is facing challenges. It seems the National Science Foundation has a list of words that draw additional scrutiny. This doesn't mean that research with these words are no longer being funded, but that if you have these words, it gets flagged and sort of looked at a little bit harder. And I looked at my proposal. I am funded by the National Science Foundation, and I've included words like bias, exclude, female, implicit bias, male dominated, and underrepresented. I got my award before this administration, and I'm wondering if I would have been able to do my work if I was writing my grant now. It's pretty wild to me that female is flagged. Like, I don't understand how you can study biology without studying half of biological creatures. So anyway, things are a little bit of a mess, and I would encourage you to keep pushing, keep standing up for science with your Congress people. Write a letter explaining that science is important to you, that the study of females is part of science, and that you believe our taxpayer dollars should continue funding basic biology work. And thank you so much for listening to me talk about female birds. And another fun fact, this is a bush tit. Did you know that female bush tits have yellow eyes, whereas male bush tits have gray or brownish eyes? Such a subtle trait and a really good one to look for. But if you're on social media, Instagram, X or Blue Sky or whatever, tag it when you see your next female bird with hashtag female birds or hashtag albatross project. And sometimes we get a chance to look through them, and we sometimes learn facts about female birds from birders like yourselves. If you have access to it, the Birds of the World is a really good resource for identifying birds of both sexes. Also, the Identification Guide to North American Birds by Peter Pyle has really detailed information in there too. The Macaulay Library is free to use, and you can look for photos of birds and sort them by sex and age. Other birders are great resources. Graduate students sometimes haven't published their work, and they can offer a lot of field information too, as well as field technicians and longtime stewards. And Google Scholar is a place that you can access abstracts of almost any published study. So that's a great source as well. So I want to thank you again for your attention this evening. This is a female downy woodpecker, she doesn't have the red dot on her head. If you're interested in finding more about the Albatross Project, I've left our Instagram handle and our website, femalebirdday.wordpress.com, as well as some contact information for myself up here. So with that, I'll take questions.